The silent cry, the oceans of Cathra. Music had always sung with peace. Beneath the crystal clear waters of their world, the Catharist people had built cities that glowed like jewels in the deep. Their towers spiraled upward through the water made of coral and living stone that grew stronger with each passing year. For thousands of generations, they had lived in harmony with their seas, creating art that captured the movement of currents, composing music that mimicked the songs of great water beasts, and developing philosophies about the interconnectedness of all living things. The Catharists themselves were beautiful creatures. Their skin shimmered with scales that changed color with their emotions flowing through blues and greens and silvers. They had large, expressive eyes adapted to see in the darkest ocean depths, and their movements through water were graceful beyond measure. They communicated through a combination of sound and bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their bodies, creating conversations that were as much art as language. Elder Morarana floated in the Grand Council chamber, a massive dome at the heart of their capital city. Through the transparent walls, she could see the everyday life of her people continuing as it had for millennia. Young Catharists played in the gardens of swaying kelp. Artists worked on sculptures that would take decades to complete. Philosophers gathered in meditation circles, their bodies glowing softly as they contemplated the nature of existence. But Morarana's scales had turned a deep, troubled purple. She could not share in the peace around her. For 3 cycles of their moon, reports had been arriving from the outer colonies, reports of ships, reports of attacks, reports of death. The Grand Council had assembled in full for the first time in 50 years. 20 of the wisest Kethis floated in a circle, their scales displaying the colors of concern and confusion. None of them had ever faced a crisis like this. Their entire civilization had been built on principles of cooperation and understanding. They had disputes, certainly, but these were resolved through discussion and compromise. The concept of organized violence, of one species attacking another without provocation or explanation, was almost incomprehensible to them. Counselor Thne spoke first, his patterns flashing urgently. The colony at Deep Water Station is gone, all 17,000 inhabitants. The attacking vessels gave no warning. They simply fired upon the habitat domes until nothing remained but debris. Another counselor, Sarah, pulsed with distress. We have tried to communicate with these attackers. We have offered to share our resources. We have asked what we might have done to offend them. They do not respond. They simply move from colony to colony, destroying everything in their path. Morarana had studied the limited information they had gathered about their attackers. The species called themselves the Ven Collective. They were an empire that had emerged from a resource-poor region of space, and they had learned to survive by taking what they needed from others. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely without mercy. They did not conquer worlds to rule them. They stripped them bare of anything valuable and moved on, leaving nothing but emptiness behind. We must seek help, Morarana said, her voice carrying through the water. We have allies. We have trade partners. Surely someone will assist us in our time of need. The council debated for hours. Some argued for immediate evacuation. Others insisted they should try harder to negotiate with the Ven. A few suggested They might attempt to build defensive weapons, though none of them had any experience with such things. The idea of creating tools designed solely to harm other beings felt fundamentally wrong too. The Cathris nature, finally, as the light from their sun filtered down through the ocean above, turning the water golden, they reached a decision. They would send distress signals to all their trading partners and allies. They would explain their situation and request assistance. Specifically, they would ask for medical supplies, evacuation vessels, and perhaps some kind of defensive technology that could protect their remaining colonies while they worked toward a peaceful resolution. The message was composed carefully. The Catharis explained their peaceful nature, described the attacks they had suffered, and made it clear they sought humanitarian aid rather than military intervention. They sent the message to 17 different species, including a relatively young civilization they had been trading with for the past 30 years. The humans, the Catharis, had first encountered humanity when a human exploration vessel had detected their radio signals and followed them to their source. The meeting had been cordial. The humans were strange creatures, soft-bodied and fragile compared to most spacefaring species. They required complex suits to survive in the Catharis underwater cities, and they moved awkwardly through the water despite their best efforts. But the humans had been genuinely interested in Cathas culture. They had marveled at the art, studied the philosophy, and established trade agreements for Catharis medical compounds, which turned out to have remarkable applications for human medicine. In return, the humans had provided advanced manufacturing technology and introduced the Catharis to several other species in their trading network. The relationship had always been friendly but distant. The humans seemed perpetually busy with their own affairs, always building, always expanding, always moving forward with an energy that the contemplative Keith found somewhat exhausting. But they had been reliable trading partners and pleasant enough company during cultural exchanges. Days passed after the messages were sent. Some responses came quickly. The Torvaldi offered sympathy, but explained they were too far away to provide meaningful assistance. Quellen sent a small medical frigate with supplies, though they admitted they had no military capabilities to offer. Other species sent similar messages, variations on the theme of "we wish we could help more." The human response was simply acknowledged, assessing situation. That was all. 2 words: no timeline, no promise of help, just acknowledgement that they had received the message. Marana tried not to let despair overtake her. Perhaps the humans were too far away. Perhaps they were dealing with their own crisis. Perhaps they simply could not spare the resources. She had heard that humans could be compassionate, but she had also heard they were practical. They might calculate that helping the Cathris was not worth the cost. Meanwhile, the Ven continued their advance. 2 more colonies fell, then 3. The attackers were moving faster now, as if they sensed that time was limited, that someone might eventually come to challenge them. Their black ships cut through space like knives, and wherever they went, they left only silence. Ven finally reached the outskirts of the Ketra system itself. Their fleet was massive, over 200 vessels of various sizes. They did not bother with stealth. They did not attempt diplomacy. They simply began their approach toward the home world where 4 billion Kethis lived, and worked and loved and dreamed, completely unprepared for the violence that was coming for them. Morana stood in the Grand Council chamber, watching the tracking displays that showed the VN fleet drawing closer. Around her, the other counselors had fallen silent. There was nothing left to say. They had tried everything they could think of. They had pleaded, they had offered everything they had called for. Help, and help had not come. We should begin evacuating the young ones. Counselor Tyne said quietly, at least we can save some of our children. Morana nodded slowly, her scales fading to a dull gray of resignation. Yes, contact all the transport vessels. We have. Begin moving children to the deep shelters. Perhaps some will survive. Long enough for her. She stopped. Every display in the chamber had suddenly changed. The tracking systems were showing something impossible. At the very edge of the Kthra system, space itself was tearing open. The Kthas had never developed faster than light travel. On their own, they used technology purchased from other species, and they understood the basic principles. FTL travel created small distortions in space when ships entered or exited, tiny ripples that dissipated quickly. What was appearing at the edge of their system was not a ripple, it was a wound. Space was splitting open across a massive area wider than their entire home world, and through that wound, something was emerging. Ships, hundreds of ships, vessels of steel and fire, each one bristling with weapons and armor. They came through in perfect formation, organized with a precision that spoke of countless hours of training and preparation. And at the center of this armada, 6 massive ships that dwarfed everything around them. Morana's scales flashed through dozen colors in rapid succession, unable to settle on any single emotion: fear, confusion, hope, disbelief. Identify those vessels, she commanded. The technicians' patterns flickered with shock. Elder Morana, the identification codes are registering as human, but this cannot be correct. This fleet size, this level of military capability, we had no idea the humans possessed anything like this. One of the massive central ships was broadcasting on all frequencies. A face appeared on the displays throughout the council chamber, a human face, female with dark skin and eyes that seemed to look directly into Morana's soul despite the vast distance between them. People of Kthra, the human woman said, her voice steady and calm. This is Fleet Admiral Sarah Akafer of the United Human Space Command. We received your distress call. We are here to provide assistance. Morana found her voice, though her patterns flickered with confusion. Admiral Akafer, we are grateful for any help you can provide, but we requested medical supplies and evacuation vessels. This appears to be a military fleet. The human admiral smiled. It was not a warm smile, it was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey. Elder Morana, you requested assistance. You are our friends, you are our trading partners. For 30 years you have welcomed our people and shared your knowledge and your culture with us, and now someone is trying to kill you. She leaned forward slightly and her eyes hardened. We brought exactly what you need. We brought an answer. Transmission shifted to show the human fleet spreading out across space, moving with purpose and precision. Weapon systems powered up, their energy signatures blazing across every sensor. The 6 massive ships which the humans, apparently called Dreadnoughts, moved into position between the VN fleet and K-Thra. Marana watched in stunned silence as 300 human warships prepared for battle. She had asked for medical help. She had asked for evacuation transports. She had asked for defensive technology. Humans had brought fire from heaven itself, and somewhere deep in her ancient soul, in a place the K-Thurs people had forgotten existed after millennia of peace, something stirred. Something that recognized what the humans had really brought: hope, not the hope of survival through escape, the hope of survival through strength, the hope that came from knowing that someone, somewhere cared enough to fight for you. The Ven fleet had noticed the human arrival. They were changing course, moving to intercept 200 Ven warships against 300 human vessels. The number seemed almost even, but Morarana looked at Admiral Akaper's face on the display, at that calm, confident expression, and she realized something. The humans had not brought 300 ships because they needed 300 ships. They had brought 300 ships because they wanted to be absolutely certain that not a single VN vessel would escape to threaten the K-Thris ever again. The battle was about to begin. Evans' answer. Admiral Sarah Akafer stood on the bridge of the UHSC. Unbroken promise, her hands clasped behind her back as she watched the tactical displays update in real time. Around her, the command crew worked with practiced efficiency, their voices calm and professional despite the magnitude of what was about to happen. 300 human warships spreading across space in a defensive formation that had been perfected through decades of training and unfortunately through actual combat experience that most species in the galaxy had never needed to acquire. The Ven fleet was approaching fast, their black ships cutting through space with the confidence of predators who had never encountered serious resistance. Admiral Akaper had read the intelligence reports on the VN collective. They were scavengers and bullies, species who had learned to prey on the peaceful and the unprepared. They had developed effective weapons and tactics for overwhelming defensive stations and lightly armed civilian vessels. They had conquered 43 colonies over the past century, and not once had they faced organized military opposition. That was about to change. Open a channel to Elder Morarana. Akafer commanded. Direct link. My authorization. The Kethis leader appeared on her personal display, her scales still flickering with uncertainty and confusion. Akafer could see other Kethis moving in the background of the transmission, all of them watching with those large expressive eyes that had evolved to see beauty in the darkest depths of their oceans. Elder Morarana Akaper began, keeping her voice gentle. Despite the urgency of the moment, I want to explain something to you before this begins. I know your people value understanding, and I want you to understand what is about to happen and why. Marana's patterns pulsed with attention. Please, Admiral, we are grateful for your presence, but we must confess we do not understand. We asked for medical assistance, for evacuation ships. We did not ask for war. Akaper nodded slowly. You didn't ask for war because your people don't think in those terms. You've built a beautiful civilization based on art and philosophy and cooperation. That's something humanity deeply respects about the Catharis, but Elder Morarana, the Ven collective doesn't share those values. They don't want to negotiate. They don't Want to understand you, they want to strip your worlds bare and leave you to die. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. 30 years ago, when we first met your people, we signed trade agreements, we exchanged goods and knowledge, but for humanity those agreements meant something more. They meant you became our friends, and humanity has a very simple philosophy. When it comes to our friends, what philosophy is that? Morarana asked. Softly, Akepper's expression hardened. An attack on our friends is an attack on us. You didn't just trade with humanity, Elder Morarana, you welcomed us into your cities, you showed our children your art, you shared your medical knowledge, which has saved countless human lives. You treated us with kindness and respect when you had no obligation to do so, and now someone is trying to kill you. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. So we didn't bring medical supplies, though coming on slower ships behind us. We didn't bring evacuation vessels, though we've prepared refugee facilities across a dozen human worlds if you need them. We brought what you actually need right now. We brought the means to ensure that the VN never threaten you again. Before Morana could respond, the tactical officer called out, Admiral Vin fleet is accelerating. They're moving to engage. 217 vessels confirmed. Their formation suggests they're not taking us seriously. Akepper allowed herself a cold smile. They're about to learn better. Fleet-wide channel, please. The communications officer nodded, and suddenly Akepper's voice was being broadcast to every ship in the human armada. All vessels, this is Admiral Akepper. Our mission parameters are clear. The VN Collective has murdered millions of innocent Caddis civilians. They have destroyed colonies without warning or mercy. They have shown themselves to be a threat, not just to our friends, but to every peaceful species in the sector. She paused, letting her words sink in. Today we send a message that will echo across the galaxy. We show the universe that humanity protects its own, and anyone we call friend is our own. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Target their combat vessels with extreme prejudice. Disable their command ships. If possible, I want their leadership alive to face justice. But make no mistake, every VIN warship that entered this system with hostile intent will leave as wreckage or not at all. Execute Operation Thunderfall. The human fleet moved as one. The 6 dreadnoughts, each 5 km of weapons and armor and pure human determination, advanced to the front line. Behind them, cruisers and destroyers spread into a formation that looked almost like a net, ready to catch anything that tried to flee. And furthest back, the carrier groups launched their fighter wings, small craft that streaked through space like angry hornets. The VIN opened fire. First, their weapons were crude but effective, designed to overwhelm civilian shields through sheer volume. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds filled the space between the two fleets. A storm of destruction that would have annihilated any undefended target. The human dreadnoughts simply absorbed it. Their shields flared bright as the VN weapons struck, but the bombardment might as well have been raindrops against a mountain. The humans had fought wars against species far more advanced than the VN. They had faced enemies who could crack planets. They had developed defensive technology through necessity, through the hard lessons learned when humanity had almost been wiped out during the Kryn invasion. 70 years ago, the VN had never faced an enemy who could survive their opening Salvo, they were about to discover what happened when you picked a fight with someone who actually knew how to fight. Back, Dreadnoughts returned fire, Alkeper commanded. Show them what heaven looks like when it's angry. The 6 massive ships opened fire simultaneously. The weapons they carried were called mass accelerators, rail guns that could propel projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. When those projectiles struck a target, they hit with the force of small nuclear weapons. But the Dreadnoughts also carried energy weapons, focused particle beams that could cut through armor like it wasn't even there, and missile pods that could launch hundreds of smart munitions, each one capable of tracking and destroying a target independently. The first volley from the human Dreadnoughts destroyed 17 VN ships outright. The VN vessels simply ceased to exist, torn apart by forces they had never imagined possible. The second volley took out 12 more. The third volley eliminated the VN flagship. Alkefer noted with satisfaction that the emergency pods had been allowed to escape. She wanted the VN commanders alive. The VN fleet, so confident minutes before, suddenly found itself in chaos. Their formation broke apart as ships tried desperately to evade, to find cover, to do anything except stand in the path of human weapons. But there was nowhere to run. The human cruisers and destroyers had spread out, cutting off every escape route. The fighter wings were already among them, targeting engines and weapon systems with surgical precision. On Kathra, Morarana watched the battle unfold on the displays in the Grand Council chamber. She could barely comprehend what she was seeing. The VN fleet, which had seemed so terrifying and unstoppable, was being systematically dismantled. Human ships moved with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, each vessel supporting the others, creating overlapping fields of fire that left no safe space for the enemy. This is not a battle, Counselor Thne whispered, his patterns flickering with awe and horror. This is an execution. Morarana realized he was right. The humans weren't fighting desperately. They weren't struggling to survive. They were methodically, efficiently, and ruthlessly destroying every VN vessel that had dared to threaten the Kethis. And they were doing it with a level of precision that spoke of deep experience, of lessons learned through countless conflicts, of a species that had learned to be very, very good at violence, because the alternative was extinction. Within 30 minutes it was over. Of the 217 VN vessels that had entered the Ketra system, none remained combat effective. Most had been destroyed outright. A few dozen had been disabled, their crews trapped in dead ships, waiting to be collected. The human fleet had suffered exactly 0 losses. A few ships showed minor damage to their shields, but even that was already being repaired. Admiral Alkeper opened a new channel, this one broadcasting to the disabled Ren ships. Her voice was cold, utterly devoid of mercy. VN commanders, this is Admiral Alkeper of the United Human Space Command. You are defeated. You are prisoners. You will be transported to neutral station. You will face trial for your crimes against the Cathars people. If you cooperate, you will be treated according to the rules of war. If you resist, you will be left here in your dead ships until your life support runs out. Choose wisely. She closed that channel and opened another one to her fleet. All vessels, excellent work. Begin recovery operations for prisoners. Destroy any VN Ship that attempts to power weapons or engines, and somebody get me a connection to Ven High Command. We need to have a conversation about what happens next. It took 6 hours for the Human Intelligence Division to track down the location of the Ven Collective's home system and establish communication with their central government. When the channel finally opened, Akepper found herself looking at a council of Ren elders there, insectoid faces twitching with barely controlled rage and fear. I am Admiral Sarah Akepper, she began without preamble. Your fleet in the K-Thra system has been destroyed. Every vessel, every weapon. Your commanders are in custody and will face justice for their crimes. But I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to make sure we understand each other. The eldest Vin, his carapace scarred from centuries of life, clicked his mandibles angrily. You have no right to interfere in our affairs. The weak exist to serve the strong. This is the law of the universe. Akepper's eyes narrowed. Perhaps in your part of the universe. But you made a mistake. You attacked species under human protection. You murdered our friends, and now you're going to learn a new law. Humanity protects its own. She pulled up a holographic display showing not just the K-Thra system, but a dozen other systems around Ren space. In each one, human ships were taking up positions. This is what happens next. Every species you've attacked in the past decade is now under official human protection. We're establishing monitoring stations throughout this sector. If any VN vessel, military or civilian, approaches any of these protected systems, it will be disabled and impounded. If you attack any of them, we will consider it an act of war against humanity itself. You cannot dictate to us, the Venner snarled. We are a sovereign power. You're scavengers and bullies, Akepper corrected coldly, and your days of preying on the peaceful are over. You have two choices. You can accept these terms, reduce your military to defensive forces only, and rejoin the galactic community as a civilized species, or you can refuse and we will systematically dismantle every military installation you possess until you have no choice but to comply. She leaned forward. I really hope you choose the first option. Humanity doesn't want to destroy you. We'd much rather see you become something better than what you are. But make no mistake, if you force our hand, we will do what is necessary. We fought wars you cannot imagine. We've faced extinction and survived. We've learned to be very, very good at breaking things when we need to. Do not test us. The Ven Council conferred among themselves, their clicking and chittering, creating an unpleasant cacophony. Finally, the elder spoke. Again, his voice bitter but resigned. We will consider your terms, but no. This humans, the galaxy will not thank you for imposing your will on sovereign species. We're not doing this for thanks, Akepper replied. We're doing this because it's right. You have 72 hours to respond. Use that time wisely. She closed the channel and allowed herself a long, slow breath. Around her, the bridge crew waited silently. Finally, her executive officer, Commander James Torres, spoke up. Think they'll accept? They'll accept, Akepper said with certainty. Bullies always do when they finally meet someone stronger. The real question is whether they'll stay reformed or whether we'll have to come back in a few years and remind them why they agreed to these terms. And if we do have to come back, Akepper's expression was grim, then we'll do what's necessary. That's what humanity does. We Protect our friends, we keep our promises, and we don't back down from threats ever. Back on Kathra Morarana. Requested another private channel with Admiral Akupper. When the human's face appeared on her display, the Kethis elder scales were cycling through colors that had no human equivalent, emotions too complex to easily translate. Admiral Morarana began slowly. I must confess, I do not know what to say. You have saved my people. You have driven away an enemy we had no hope of defeating on our own. And you did it with a level of violence that my people have never known, never even imagined. Akupper nodded, her expression softening slightly. I understand, Elder Morarana, and I'm sorry you had to witness that. I know the Kathris value peace above all else. I know this must be deeply disturbing for your people. Disturbing, yes, Marana agreed, but also humbling. We have spent millennia believing that peace was the only path, that violence was always wrong, that understanding could solve any problem. And then the VN came and we discovered that some problems cannot be solved with words alone, some threats cannot be reasoned with, some evils must be stopped by force. Her scales settled into a deep, thoughtful blue. You humans have shown us something about the universe that we never wanted to know. But you have also shown us something else. You have shown us that there are those who will stand between the peaceful and the violent, those who will use their strength not to conquer but to protect, those who will fight so that others may live in peace. She paused, her large eyes meeting Akupper's through the display. Thank you, Admiral, thank you for being the shield we did not know we needed. Thank you for considering us worthy of protection. Thank you for showing us that strength and compassion can coexist. Akupper felt something tighten in her chest. This was why humanity fought, not for glory, not for conquest, not for resources. They fought so that species like the Kathris could continue to create their art, to develop their philosophies, to live in the peace they had built for themselves. You're welcome, Elder Morarana, she said quietly, and know this, you're not just our trading partners anymore. You're not just our friends. As of today, the Kathris people are under the formal protection of the United Human Space Command. Anyone who threatens you threatens us, and we will always answer that threat. Always, Morana asked. Akupper smiled, and this time it was warm, genuine. Always, that's what humanity does. We keep our promises, we protect our friends, and we never ever abandon those who need us. Over the following weeks, human ships remained in the Kathra system, helping to rebuild what the VN had destroyed. Medical vessels arrived along with construction ships and supply transports. Human engineers worked alongside Kathris architects to rebuild the damaged colonies. Human doctors shared trauma treatment techniques, helping the Kethis cope with the psychological wounds left by the attacks. And on quiet nights when the human fleet was lit up against the darkness of space, young Kathris would swim to the surface of their oceans and look up at those lights. They would remember the day when violence had come to their world, and how other beings, strange, soft creatures from a distant star, had traveled across the galaxy to stand between them and death. The Kathris had learned that the universe was more dangerous than they had believed, but they had also learned that it was more beautiful than they had imagined, because somewhere out there, among the countless stars, there were humans, and humans protected their friends always. Admiral Sarah Akefer, stood on the observation deck of the Unbroken Promise, watching Kathra slowly rotate below. Behind her, Commander Torres approached quietly. Admiral, the Vin have officially accepted our terms. They're pulling back their forces and agreeing to the monitoring stations. It's over. Akefer nodded but didn't turn around. For now there will be other threats, other species who think they can prey on the peaceful, and when they appear we'll be there. It's a big galaxy, Admiral. We can't protect everyone. Finally, Akefer turned to face him, and Torres saw something in her eyes that made him understand why she had risen to command the fleet. It wasn't just skill or intelligence, it was absolute, unshakable conviction. Maybe not everyone, she said, but we can protect our friends, and we will, because that's what makes us human. That's what makes us different from species like the Ven. We don't conquer, we don't exploit. We stand between the darkness and the light, and we never back down. She looked back at Kathra, at the beautiful blue world where 4 billion Kathras lived and dreamed and created art that made the soul sing. They asked for aid, she said softly. We brought heaven burning warships and an answer written in fire. And we do it again in a heartbeat. Because that's the promise we make to every friend, to every ally, to everyone who stands beside us in the darkness. We protect our